The economic aspect is something that takes people a long time to get. There are plenty of people that will get on Tether because they trust the dollar, right? Really, the big thing that they need to get is the economic reality, which is that you have a harder money in Bitcoin than this sort of easy money with the U.S. dollar. The U.S. healthcare system is entirely the result of fiat money, right? Like the way that these industries attracted workers was by giving them better benefits, and like healthcare ended up being one of those things, and it's sort of been enshrined, and everything in fiat tends to stay static once something comes in, because you have the money to keep it static, and the companies that are benefiting from it like lobby regulators and so on to keep things static. And this is one of the really pernicious effects of inflation, is that all the stuff that is around you is constantly debasing. And the technological improvement is just not enough in most of these industries to offset the continuous inflation.
This is Decentralized Radio. I'm Tristan.
And I'm Ryan.
The goal of this podcast is to help educate you on how to live your most optimal life. We will host industry expert guests to shed light on topics that matter.
We are not gurus, rather two individuals who have had to pave their own path to health and vitality, independent of the centralized systems that plague modern society.
All right, we are live in the Bitcoin Commons in Austin, Texas. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Jimmy, how's it going? Nice to meet you.
It's going well. Nice to meet you too. And we are at the Commons, and it's a little empty because it's like 8:30 in the morning. So, yeah.
We beat the early morning rush here, which is good, because then we can get a nice setup going, nice conversation going. And yeah, for those of you who don't know Jimmy, he's a OG Bitcoiner, author, advisor, kind of just pioneer, especially down here in Texas in the Bitcoin space. So how does it feel being in the space for over a decade now, right?
Yeah.
Just about a decade.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whirlwind, obviously. It's very different than the career I envisioned for myself. And, I love that it's constantly changing, constantly evolving, constantly, you get hit with different things all the time. And all the while, everything is growing. So I'm a startup guy, right? I did a lot of different startups over many years. So in many ways, this has some of the same feel, right? Like where it's growing and things are happening, but it's way more decentralized, and the people that are benefiting are way different than a typical startup, which is basically the founders and the VCs, something like that, instead of like plebs. So it feels very different, in that way.
Does it feel different in a better sort of way in terms of just how everything's set up, and then how it's been growing in maybe a more, I guess, organic way?
Yeah, the adoption curve is always, it just sort of like goes as it goes, right? Because we have this myth that you can orange pill everybody by like having a couple of ads on TV and maybe like having a NASCAR with a Bitcoin sticker or something, and it's like that's not how adoption works. And this is sort of the big mistake that a lot of marketers make. And if you come in from marketing, it's like, oh yeah, we can totally market Bitcoin, and we'll say this and say that, and then people will buy chunks of it. And like over the past 10 years, we've seen that's not how it works. It takes people years to get Bitcoin. So the adoption is very slow in like for any individual. But collectively, it's, it takes time, but man, it like just completely rips when things are going well, like they are right now. And it's a fascinating thing to be observing. And it is very organic. I think it's a lot more permanent. Like you're actually getting people that really understand it at the core of the people that are owning it, and those are the people that are benefiting it the most, not the high time preference traders or whatever. It incentivizes the right thing. So I think you do get much more of that organic word of mouth, one person by one person growth that I think we should be hoping for. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think anyone who's tried to orange pill their family or their friends kind of realizes that it takes a long time, and it can be frustrating, especially just for people you care about. But you realize they kind of have to get it on their own. You can't like force them to get it, because then if it's just a quick thing, oh yeah, this is going to go up in price, like they're not really buying in for the right reasons. That's definitely something that took me a while to understand, especially with my parents and friends. But everyone finds it at a different time, and I think that organic growth is better, but it does take longer, and that's probably a good thing. And talking to Will here yesterday, it's just the products, services, companies that need to be built out for all of this to keep growing in a sustainable way and then keep making those strides. It all just kind of takes time and effort, but it's not really the marketing piece, like you're saying, I think, is that's not that important. It's going to market itself. We just need to build the services to provide that on-ramp for people and usability going forward.
Yeah, we definitely need something a little different, right? Like it's not like anything else in the market where you just you have a new computer, you just sort of display the features, and then people buy it on that. Like a lot of people don't even know that they need Bitcoin, and that's the thing is they don't until you see that you need it, and like when you do need it, then it becomes very important. But until you see that you need it, it takes time to get there. I mean, you're not going to really want it until that point. So, but at the same time, like it is a very low time preference kind of thing where you have to wait for people, but when they do get it, man, do they really get it? And it creates the holders that you need for something like money, where you have a deep liquidity pool because there are so many people that are that believe in it so much. So it's good and it's bad. It's bad in the sense that the eschaton is coming quickly enough, but there's plenty of good things about it, especially with regard to like the conviction that the people have. It's almost by definition not able to be like a tulip bubble, because with tulips or whatever, like just everyone stops believing at a certain point, and you're sort of playing on the greater fool thing. The base layer of holders in Bitcoin, they really get it. You're not going to knock them off of Bitcoin. And that makes for a much more solid base, and this is why it continues to increase. Even if you have like fluctuations from, the speculators and so on, because you have more believers each time.
Yeah, that conviction becomes real, just especially cycle to cycle. I think people realize it. For me, you realize actually when you have that true conviction, you're probably happier when the price goes down, actually. And that's how I feel right now. I'm like, ripping, come on, I kind of want to accumulate some more cheap sats, but that's a good feeling to have when either way you're kind of happy with how things are going, because you want to, if it goes down in price, you're happy to accumulate more. If it goes up, obviously you're able to have more value from an asset perspective. But how did you spend a lot of time last year traveling? How did that shape your perspective from a global kind of outlook? Because something that Peter McCormick and these guys talk about a lot is that Bitcoin is different to everybody in different scenarios. And here in the U.S., we're obviously very spoiled. And although we have fiat currency, we have the best one. So not everybody really understands broken money. But in other areas of the world, this is an everyday, really strong understanding and also plight for them to go through.
Yeah, I don't know if a lot of the people that are suffering have really made that connection yet. And it's again, that's going to take time. What I've observed, like visiting a lot of these meetups in different cities, is that, it's who you would expect that are sort of like the first adopters, the Bitcoin maximalists or whatever. It's the people that are generally a little bit technical, maybe on the younger side, definitely libertarian leaning. And they get it first. And then as, they spread the word, then other people tend to come in. And The economic aspect is something that takes people a long time to get. There are plenty of people that will get on Tether because they trust the dollar, right? And it's a weird phenomenon because there's actually more demand for Tether oftentimes than there is Bitcoin. But that's okay because they are at least getting used to the mechanics of it. But really, the big thing that they need to get is the economic reality, which is that you have a harder money in Bitcoin than this sort of easy money with the U.S. dollar. And at some point they'll get it. It's just we tend to be very impatient in this community, especially like the marketing types. They want everything to happen now because that's they think they have to sort of like catch the zeitgeist, or there's a limited time before you become stale or something, and that's not what Bitcoin is. It's not the new hotness that you need to like convince everyone to adopt before something else comes along. That's I think the complete mischaracterization that plagues a lot of the people that are like going rah for adoption. It's fine as it is, and you just need people to get it slowly, right? And get the underlying reality rather than hey, we need, this is like any other product or whatever. It's not. It's money. It's got different rules. There are different economic laws that regulate it and stuff like that. And it's not like new fall fashion thing or whatever. It's not based on a season. It's based on this is long-term savings, right? Like, and that should change how people view it. But unfortunately, too many people are sort of in that old paradigm, a weird paradigm about it.
Hey, friend. Thanks for listening. If you really enjoy this podcast, it would be really appreciated if you left us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple, or subscribe to our content on YouTube. This helps us get to a larger reach and a larger audience to spread this wonderful free education. Yeah, and I think that's a good transition, to obviously the past year. What you've been working on is your new book, Fiat Ruins Everything, and you've authored books in the past, Programming Bitcoin, Bitcoin, the American Dream, which is right behind your head. It's fun. But I think the education piece is huge for me. I mean, I've written a book, it was half about Bitcoin, and I'm big on education, and I think it's a good way. So what was really the motivating factor to get something out in print, especially, there are a decent amount of Bitcoin books out there. I guess your book does not have Bitcoin in the title, which is fantastic. It's a good change. And obviously the content is fantastic as well. So what was really the inspiration behind getting that out there?
Yeah, I've written a lot of books, and they all have a very specific audience. So Programming Bitcoin, it's for developers that don't know Bitcoin, that want to learn. The Little Bitcoin book, it was aimed at sort of people that didn't know that much about Bitcoin, but were interested in human rights. And okay, here's a book to sort of explain Bitcoin's importance from that aspect. Thank God for Bitcoin, it was aimed at Christians. It's like, okay, like, this is why you need to learn about Bitcoin, because it's more moral money. And Bitcoin and the American Dream, it was, like, it's aimed at politicians, regulators, people like that don't understand Bitcoin at all. Here's a short read. Now you can understand your audience. Fiat Ruins Everything was written for Bitcoiners. And, especially during bear markets and stuff, it's, like especially if it's your first bear market, you tend to like waver and feel bad and stuff like that. This was a way to show the justness of our cause and to rally the troops a little bit and to show just what we're up against, because fiat really does ruin so many things, and things that you would never think of, like family formation or science or the education system or whatever. And the idea was to lay all of that out with, good arguments about how fiat ruins these things, so that you'd have more conviction on the Bitcoin stack that you have and, this journey that we're all on. And I don't know, it's been an interesting sort of reception. A lot of people really like it. But yeah, hopefully it achieves the goal that that I had, which was to get the people that are in Bitcoin to understand just like what we're up against and how good and beneficial Bitcoin actually is.
Yeah, and I always think it's like it's a good read for people who are maybe on the cusp, right? Because it's not about like Bitcoin, it's about why the current system's so messed up. And it's very timely because it's, since 2021, a lot of this has accelerated since 2020, of course. All the expansion, the injection in the monetary supply, people have realized that more and more that the money is broken. And it's like, here's a resource onto why this has been going on actually for, the whole last 100 years. And yeah, I think, I don't think it's just for Bitcoiners. I think it's a lot of people. I'm definitely going to, share with my family and friends that are, they need more information to understand why this system is so broken and why, like you said, it's affected everything. And this podcast is probably like 70% health related, maybe like 20% Bitcoin and 10% other stuff. So that's where I'm really interested to bridge that gap as well, as talking about when the money is broken. Like science, academia, the healthcare system, these things are all broken as a result of that. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that and how you communicated that and what did you uncover kind of researching those areas?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't write a chapter on healthcare, though I think I could if I went down a little bit deeper. And I've actually talked to Andy Schoonover. He's CEO of Crowd Health, about maybe doing more about that but the U.S. healthcare system is entirely the result of fiat money, right? Like, if you look at the history of the U.S. healthcare system, there were sort of like price caps on like the income that you can make in a particular industry, and the way that these industries attracted workers was by giving them better benefits, and like healthcare ended up being one of those things, and it's sort of been enshrined, and everything in fiat tends to stay static once something comes in, because you have the money to keep it static, and the companies that are benefiting from it like lobby regulators and so on to keep things static. So you get some weird vestige of the post-war late 40s, early 50s era that have essentially like kept going, and we have this weird healthcare law, Obamacare, which came into existence, which, like, from an efficiency standpoint, it's like the absolute worst of both worlds, right? Like, if you have single payer, at least everything goes through one place, and you can optimize for that and make that cheaper or whatever. Or you can have like decentralized healthcare. Everyone like pays whatever, and it's like market based or whatever, which is what I'm in favor of. But we have like the worst of both worlds. You have all the regulation of single payer and all the non-competition of single payer and all of the mess of sort of like different standards and things like that, standards of care where people just sort of get paid if they check some boxes. It's a terrible system. And I mean, that's just one aspect of it. But right now, the healthcare system is basically like 5 or 6 large insurance companies. Even the hospital systems, there aren't that many, right, in the United States. And this is a pattern of fiat money, is that you usually get like 5 or 6 companies that control everything, control an entire industry. And there's sort of like cartel-like behavior that happens as a result. Now, the reason why you have 5 or 6 is because there's a huge advantage to being large in a fiat economy. You have access to the commercial bond market. You have access to newly printed money. Oftentimes, you'll get government subsidies, bailouts, things like that. If you're large enough, if you're a mom and pop store or like small size in any of these industries, you don't get any of that. So there's this enormous advantage through the printing of fiat money that large companies get. So healthcare is one of those things where you have 5 or 6 healthcare companies, 5 or 6 drug companies, 5 or a handful of hospital systems and things like that. And it's not just healthcare; it's like all kinds of other things, like five like big ag companies and five just five food processors, five accounting firms, five consulting firms, right? Like just everything is controlled by five or six large companies, and that happens all over the economy. Because when you're a certain size, you have an advantage, and there's only so much of the market, and around five or six is like sort of like the optimum in an economy like this, where okay, like all right, the five or six airlines like get all the bailouts or whatever, and that's sort of the game that everyone is playing. So you get. And essentially, these large companies become giant rent seekers, right? Like they tax transactions in some way, shape, or form without providing any value. So think about your health insurance, right? They really don't need to be there, and Andy's kind of proven it. Like they don't need to be sitting between the doctor or the healthcare provider and the patient, but they are, and they extract a tremendous amount of money, right? Like they collect health insurance premiums from the patient, and then they pay out the doctor like eventually, right? Like it's usually the billing cycle is 45 to like 90 days or something like that. And they don't provide anything. They push paper, right? Like the actual care that's given is a joke, right? And of course, like they are sort of the gatekeepers. They're like sort of the people that give permission for this type of surgery or this type. They don't provide any value, and they're a giant vortex of rent seeking, right? Like they take all of this money. Like where does your money go when you pay like $2,000 a month for your health insurance or whatever? Well, it's going to them. It's feeding all of these bureaucrats. It's like, I mean, maybe some of it goes to your doctor, but that's like like a very small percentage. And what Andy does with Crowd Health is amazing, because you can see just how much value these health insurance companies are taking, because he'll negotiate with the doctor directly. Okay, we'll pay cash, and they're like, oh, in that case, we'll take a significantly less amount, and you cut out the middleman. Wow, but like middlemen are all over the economy. And it's not just healthcare; it's like food. It's
science.
Science. It's education. It's all kinds of regulations around like transportation, and like everything has these giant companies that end up being middlemen, rent-seeking companies, and that's a feature of fiat money, because those are the companies that are stealing value from people that are actually doing productive work. And in the end, what you get are people that are getting poorer as a result, because there are just so many rent seekers now in the economy, where most families now, both parents work, right? Most families now, they can't afford a house, so they have to like rent, and they can't have that many kids. Like everything, we're just way poorer than we were 50 years ago, because you used to be a single breadwinner. And you can afford a 3-bedroom house, and like with maybe 2 years of income, something like that. Now it's like 8 years of income, and so you have to have both parents work, and no one can afford kids. We've all gotten poor, and rent seeking, and these giant companies, and the system that's been set up through fiat money. That's why.
Yeah, I think the healthcare is a good example. And actually, we've had Andy on the show. I'm gonna talk to him again Friday. So really stoked about that. But yeah, that's just like you said, one example. And the ag livestock industry is something I've written about a lot. It's insane. And something I'm curious is, when did this start all accelerating tremendously? Obviously, we went off the gold standard 71. I know for ag food, that was a big thing as well in terms of timing, and subsidies all came about. But yeah, when did this all really start to get bad?
Yeah, I mean, it's been getting bad, I think, since the establishment of the Federal Reserve, but it really accelerated after 1971, when we cut ties to the gold standard. And if you think about it, like the reason why all of that happens is because of inflation, and it has this very weird effect on every company. So think about what happens with inflation. So let me just give you a few statistics to begin. So the M2 money supply, U.S. dollar, all U.S. dollars in existence, that's like one way to measure. In 1959, $289 billion. Currently, it's around 20-something, 21, $22 trillion, right? Like, so it's, gone up by a significant amount, right? Almost like 70 or 80x, somewhere around there. So what happened? How did we get 70? Well, they just expand the money supply. You annualize that, and that's the compound annual growth rate ends up being somewhere around 7%. That, not coincidentally, is the hurdle rate for most investors. So you're just keeping up with the monetary inflation if you're going at 7%. Anything in addition to
But
that.
the S&P 500 is, growing 8% every year. So that's how you make money, right?
Well, so S&P is actually right around 7%, right? Like real estate, maybe 5.5, right? Like gold, somewhere around like 6.5, something like that. So, all of these hurdle rates are, basically like inflation. So, based on that number, and by the way, other numbers are way worse. So if you look at like global N2, the expansion rate is somewhere around 14%. So that means for every United States, there's somebody that's like 21%, right? Which is crazy. All right. So what happens with, let's just stick with the 7%. All right. What does that mean? That means that to keep the prices the same, and companies hate raising prices because customers really hate price increases. What do you do as a company? Now, like every industry is getting better a little bit, right? Like, so for
In
example,
terms of like efficiency.
yeah.
If you're a health conscious food consumer who's also very active, you know how big of a struggle it is to find a bar that is both convenient and nutrient dense. That's why I was so excited when I discovered the Alpa Bar. The Alpa Bar is a meat based bar that contains only simple ingredients: 100% grass fed beef, tallow, and honey, and is both nutrient dense and convenient, and packs a caloric punch of over 300 calories. For me, this was a game changer and is now the go-to snack and fuel source I use when I'm hiking, camping, hunting, skiing, or doing anything in the outdoors and I don't have the resources to cook a full meal. The Alpa Bar is made proudly in Colorado and only uses locally sourced meat. JJ and Rob are also extremely based and accept Bitcoin for payment. I highly recommend you check out the Alpa Bar for any time you need a nutrient dense and convenient snack on the go. Check them out at eatalpa.com and use code DRadio5 at checkout to get a 5% discount. And if you pay in Bitcoin, you can get an additional discount on top of that. That's eataupa.com and use code DRadio5 at checkout.
So, for example, airline industry, they manage to find like 1 or 2% efficiency in some way, shape, or form every year. So whether it's fuel economy or like fitting in more seats into the cabin or something, they figure out ways to get maybe 1 or 2% efficiency, and that's true of every industry. You have new innovations, new technologies, new things that maybe your engineers come up with, maybe a new assembly line like tech, or maybe there some parts got cheaper, something like that. But you can squeeze out 1-2% every year just on that. But now you have like 5%, 6% left. How do you keep that up? Well, it turns out that there are a few choices. One, and this is probably the best one, it's the scale, right? So you have to get really big to get economies of scale. Yeah, to get costs down, because you produce more to reduce the per unit cost. And, you have to run these things very, very efficiently, which is why we have sort of this global supply chain right now, right? That's like highly fragile, very interdependent. And, you get, lumber from, South Carolina that gets shipped to China, and that gets assembled somewhat, and then gets shipped somewhere else and gets further assembled, and then it comes back, it goes to Europe or something, and then that gets sold there. All of that is like highly finely tuned for efficiency, and you need to do that. So scale is one way in which you can get some of that savings, but that only goes so far. The other ways of doing it are way worse, because you can debase your product, right? You can use cheaper ingredients. You can use cheaper labor, which, like locating to another place or whatever, you have to reduce cost. Eventually, you end up having to debase your product. Maybe the first few years, you can squeeze out enough efficiency by trying really hard. But at a certain point, you can't. And then most companies would rather debase their product and keep their prices the same rather than keep increase prices, because they're in competition with other players. And you have these 5 or 6 big companies that are always at each other's throats. And if company A is keeping prices low by sort of scaling and debasing their product a little bit, well, company B is very much pressured to do the same. So how do you debase your product? Well, you could give less of a quantity, right? Like this, what we call shrinkflation. Or you can use cheaper ingredients, which has been happening in food for a while now, right? Like everything has gotten like more and more debased. High fructose corn syrup, all kinds of like weird chemical ingredients that are very cheap to produce, and so on. So that debasement ends up hurting the consumer. And this is one of the really pernicious effects of inflation, is that all the stuff that is around you is constantly debasing. And the technological improvement is just not enough in most of these industries to offset the continuous inflation. So, we, in a sense, the system we have is kind of inevitable for the monetary system we have, because you need to be a giant company to have scale, to get access to loans and things like that, to keep the per unit cost down. But in the other way to do it is through direct subsidization, which often happens as well, where you have gas prices that are too high, and you need people to work because you need their productivity, so you subsidize that somehow, or big companies about to go under, you subsidize that, and maybe they're losing a lot of money on the electric cars or whatever, and you keep subsidizing it instead of letting what market forces would rather do with a lot of this stuff. So you get a lot of weird incentives as a result of fiat money, but the main thing that makes everything worse is inflation and the debasement that goes along with it.
Yeah, everything you just said is like that is exactly what clicked for me when I realized the money is breaking everything, especially the food and health system. And the food is it's such a good example, because people are like, well, why is there so much processed food, and why are they using all these crappy ingredients? It's because they have to make more money or they're not keeping up. And then you, especially if you borrowed money on zero interest, which is also a result of fiat, and then you have to sit in front of investors telling them how you're going to make this money and keep making more money, then you're in this rabbit hole of, debt and being tied to the fiat system. It's just, it makes a lot of sense when you realize, because 7 to 8% growth of the money supply annually is a big number to overcome. But the consumers think inflation's 2%, so that's why they can't raise the prices probably more than 2%.
Yeah, and it's not just food, right? Let's talk about the other part of the healthcare system, like healthcare providers, right? It's crazy, but I don't know if you remember, but many years ago, doctors had this reputation for playing golf all the time. You remember that, right? Like, that's a doctor. They're going and playing golf on a Wednesday afternoon or whatever. And that used to be the case, right? Because they didn't have to work all that much to make a pretty good living. But what has inflation done to doctors? Well, they don't have a reputation for playing golf anymore. I can tell you.
Carousel. Their office door is a carousel.
Yeah, and I used to work for Athena Health way back in the day, and I worked on like the patient scheduling system and stuff. And one of the features that they all wanted was the ability to double and triple book. Why would you need that? Why do you have like the same 30-minute slot to 3 different patients? Well, I mean, think about what the doctor has to do. They have so much pressure because they get paid less on each patient, right? Because you have this giant rent-seeking healthcare system. It used to be that they got paid more on a per visit basis, but as they get paid less on those, now they have to make it up with volume, right? They in a sense they're scaling Well, so what happens? Well, they see 3 patients at the same time, and they visit each one for about 8 minutes, right? And then the rest of the time they're looking up stuff on WebMD or whatever. And this is what they have to do. So the quality of care has gone down because they spent way less time with you, because the inflation has made it so that they can't spend as much time, and they're not getting paid as much on all of this stuff because the healthcare systems are in the middle, and they're trying to control the price. And so they can't pay out as much as they used to because of inflation. So, who gets squeezed? The doctor. So now instead of playing golf every Wednesday afternoon, they're double, triple booking, right? Like it's gone way past. Like doctors are now like some of the hardest working because they have to go and see so many patients to make what, 30 years ago, somebody that had a much shorter schedule was able to do. And this is also why like so many go into specialties and so on, because it's way more lucrative, right? Like, okay, there's a scarcity around like brain surgery or whatever, so I need to go into that rather than like family practice or something like that, where you do have these like inflationary pressures really getting into it. But these other specialties, like they don't have as much of that, and there's like all sorts of bad incentives there. But you get the debasement of quality of not just goods but services as a result of the inflation that's just sort of persistent.
Yeah, and then you think of what's the byproduct of that. So the quality of care is lower. So then, because they don't have time to actually even be on top of the research and providing for their patients and looking into things like lifestyle habits. And then the quality is worse. And then because of the food system, because of the pharmaceutical push, the fiat push across the board, more people are sick. So now we have this epidemic of chronic disease. The doctors are useless in the centralized system, and everyone's very siloed as well. Like, oh, if you have a gut problem, you need to go to the gut specialist. Really, our whole body is connected, but the system's been set up in that way. So yeah, it's a travesty. But I think the $1 million question I have for you is this all by design? Or is this a byproduct of just how things came to be? Because obviously the Federal Reserve was set up in very, creature of Jekyll Island. This is all very planned. And, fiat money is a great way to fund war and industrial military complex. And, the elites stay in power. We lose more control year by year, decade by decade. Consumerism's much more easy to grasp the whole society. So what is your take on this?
Yeah, so I liken it kind of to cancer, right? Like when you're eating like really badly, right? Lots of sugar, stuff like that, you're more likely to get cancer because that's kind of what it feeds on. And I think newly printed money is kind of like the really high fructose corn syrup, or really sort of toxic thing for your body, where all of these toxic things grow. And the toxic things are like cancer cells. They're rent seeking, right? Like they extract resources without really giving anything back. They are taxing transactions without creating any value. So healthcare insurance systems are just one example. But like I said, all of these industries have 5 big players, and they are in many ways, giant rent seekers. And what fiat money does is it allows those organizations to thrive. And when they're thriving, that means everybody else ends up losing. And they set policy, they set regulation, so it's not like somebody in 1913 said, we're going to make the healthcare system worse and kill off a bunch of people. Maybe they did, but I don't think that was their ambition. What ends up happening is that you get a healthcare industrial complex that sprouts up as a result of the fiat money, and everyone within that healthcare industrial complex is motivated to keep it going and keep it growing and keep the rest of the people suffering as a result. So, we get 5 large defense contractors, and they continue to figure out ways to have a new war. It's not a coincidence, for example, that right after Afghanistan fell, we're gonna have this conflict in Ukraine. As Ukraine is like negotiating for peace, we're now going to have a a conflict in Israel, right? With Iran, maybe, right? Like that sort of thing is very common as these cancer cells grow. And we essentially created the Anthony Fauci's of the world, the rent-seeking CEOs and these companies. It was created. These are the children of fiat money. These are the children of the persistent inflation and monetary expansion and the theft of value and everything else. These are all caused ultimately by it, but it wasn't planned. I don't think it's just at a certain point, as these things grow, there's nothing stopping their growth. It really is like cancer. Like you need to kill it off in some way, and it would be nice if it were like targeted, but what the system kind of needs is to destroy a lot of what's built up that's like sucking energy from civilization itself.
Yeah, and what you just said is kind of what I want to ask next. Everyone asks me like, well, what are the risks of Bitcoin, or what? To me, the biggest risk of Bitcoin is the government and at the snap of a finger just completely making all the correct ethical decisions to reverse some of the effects of fiat money, sound economic policy, monetary policy, right?
Uh-huh.
And what's less likely than that to happen? Probably nothing, probably us all living on Mars might even be more likely at this point. So is there really any going back at this point?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the government suddenly making sound decisions would be one of the risks of Bitcoin. But like these lobbies are way too powerful. And I mean, we saw just with like the drug companies, right? Like these are the 5 big drug companies or whatever. They essentially dictated COVID policy for 3 years. That is crazy. That is crazy. But that's what they ended up doing. You'd think a lobby that can do something like that is going to give up their power in any way. I mean, it's possible that things get so bad you get like a Javier Milei situation where they start changing things like whole hog. But there is a deep state, and really what the deep state is it's a giant rent-seeking bureaucracy that lives within government right now. That's what it is. And there's motivation for them to survive, and it's they fight back, but they have to eat civilization to do it. So I really don't think there's a way that like things turn around politically. I think there are just way too many rent seekers, and rent seekers will vote in more rent seekers, right? Like this is like the public employee union problem where you're negotiating against people that want to give you everything you want. Well, yeah, there's no limit to your growth then.
If you've been trying to reap the benefits of nose-to-tail nutrition while eating wild game, it can be extremely hard to source and find, and sometimes it just doesn't taste that good. Luckily, I found a kick-ass company, Nose to Tail Provisions, who offer incredibly delicious, extremely nutritious, regeneratively raised wild game straight to your door. As someone that has personally battled autoimmune disease like the founders of Nose to Tail Provisions, I understand the importance of what you put into your body and the quality behind it. That's why I am honored to have them as a sponsor of Decentralized Radio, and man, their elk snacks are delicious. All of their products are raised, grass-fed, 100% microplastic-free, and deliver a nutritious punch. And right now, I'm proud to offer 10% off anything you order from them using our code DRADIO10, DRADIO 10.
Yeah, but it has seemed like there's been quite a shift, right?
Mm-hmm.
Way more because of COVID, mostly. Way more people are aware of this. Way more people are aware that money's at least somewhat broken in terms of inflation. Way more people are pissed off. They got jabbed and got wronged by Big Pharma. And in Argentina, for example, like it was so bad for so long that they were like, all right, the only way we're going to fix this is if we, go the complete opposite direction with someone like Milei. That doesn't really, we're not at that stage, right? Like we don't have 50% inflation. We don't need to not saying we should or should not, but the consensus opinion is not like someone as far,
even Argentina.
But like, I guess in the US, what I'm asking is, do you think that there's going to be some swing back? Because it seems like, a lot of politicians are kind of playing into this right now. Or is that just kind of like an act for a little bit? Because people are definitely more aware of all the issues today compared to 5 years ago.
Yeah, some people are, but even in Argentina, Javier Milei got what 50-something% of the vote, right? Like there's 40-some percent that don't get it, right, or that think more socialism, more IMF, more World Bank. So there's not a consensus by any means, which is why it's going to be very hard for him to implement a lot of this stuff, because 40% can resist pretty hard. And you try to dismantle it and stuff. I mean, even when Trump was in office, he tried to eliminate a lot of stuff. Couldn't do it, right? Like it's you need way more than 50%. I think you need like 80%. I think you need like 90%, like what you have with Bukele in El Salvador. Like that's the degree that you need. Now, are we going to get there anytime soon? I really doubt it. But I mean, there's sort of like this swing back and forth, and it's really like all for show anyway. I think the deterioration continues until you get 80-90% of people just absolutely sick of it. And given how many rent seekers there are, I don't think that's happening. It's weird because somebody described the democracy as like a sheep and two wolves deciding who to eat for dinner or what to eat for dinner. It's like you end up swallowing the minority or whatever. I think the rent-seeking aspect of fiat money has kind of turned democracy into that, because you have rent seekers that continuously need to steal, right, from everybody else, and they do that through inflation. Now, like when you're reducing interest rates, you're stealing more. When you're raising interest rates, you're stealing less. And we're kind of at a part of the cycle where they're stealing a little less by raising interest rates. And that's bringing a little more reality into the market, and it's satisfying some of those people. Like, I talked about like the UPS union strike, right? And they're now getting paid like $170,000 with all benefits included. Yeah, great, good for them. Could they deserve it, right? Like they're actually providing value. That they're providing value. Whereas, the HR DEI person from Twitter that got fired did not deserve a penny, right? Like they were detracting value from the economy. But in a low interest rate environment, those are the people that get funded, and the UPS driver is the one that's getting screwed. In a higher interest rate environment, it gets reversed, where essentially the UPS driver is getting stolen less. So that's the only pendulum swing I think we're seeing right now, but it's not really fixing the whole thing. It's just going back and forth a little bit on like policies as we continue to as Rome continues to burn. I think what needs to happen are individuals that like sort of turn onto something like Bitcoin and recognize like the system for what it is and opt out of it. And then you get like a whole parallel economy, and the parallel economy does way better than the fiat economy, and all of the rent seekers sort of like die a gruesome, slow, and tortuous death, which is like, I think, nothing less than they deserve.
Yeah, and the high interest rate environment might be better, but it's not like we can keep that up for long with the $1 trillion of debt or interest payments every year. Mm-hmm. So how was the reception from legislators? You said, Bitcoin and the American Dream is like targeted from that perspective. And, Vivek has kind of talked about how people, they know about Bitcoin, and says some of them are threatened by it. They know it's a real, or it's challenging current system. And then a few are embracing, but yeah, how is your perspective there? Because the way I think about it, it's like, if we do get to this 70-80%, and people are demanding, say, like Bitcoin as the economy, and that's already running on the side chain to the fiat economy, they're either going to have to embrace it or, fight it. And my instinct is they're probably just going to keep wanting to fight it harder and harder.
They'll try, but the thing is, like, you can't do it by inflation anymore. Inflation is so evil because it's a stealth tax. You have no idea that you're getting taxed. But if you have an alternative to the money, right, then your inflation only gets you so far. There's only so much juice you can squeeze from inflation. And this happens in hyperinflating economies all the time. So I was in Lebanon, for example, and this was the dynamic. Everyone's using dollars. So, the Lebanese central bank can continue to print more of the Lebanese lira, but I mean, it only goes so far because it's gotten to a point where the market anticipates that inflation, so that they only squeeze like a few drops every time they squeeze, and they're getting to a point of rapid diminishing returns where they can't do it, right? So what does that mean? Well, that means that the civil servants, right, like the rent-seeking bureaucratic class, which is about like a third of their economy or something like that, which is, obviously very high, but those people can't get paid, right? Like, because the paychecks that they're receiving are not enough, and then when they ask for a raise, that creates more inflation, causes the price that it's not affordable anymore. So this rent-seeking class now has to actually produce in the economy, right? Maybe become a UPS driver or whatever. Like that ends up becoming the thing that they have to do to survive, right? Like you're essentially starving the beast because there's an alternative with the dollar that they can't control. They can't print more. So they end up, the Lebanese central bank ends up, becoming neutered in their ability to stealth tax. So what's the alternative, right? Like how do you get more revenue if you can't stealth tax? You have to do explicit taxes, and oh boy, those are not popular, right? You need actual tax collectors. And think about how unpopular the IRS is, right? You need and like this threatens politicians more than anything. So the dynamic at play is that once you take inflation off the table, the only thing that can happen is the reduction of rent seekers. And that's sort of like the tipping point that we're looking for as Bitcoiners, is that, okay, like they're good. I mean, they could try explicit taxes, but like that'll get all the politicians kicked out real quick. Really, but the alternative is hyperinflation, where you're trying to squeeze more juice out, and that can run for, I don't know, 5-10 years or something, but like that goes bust too. At that point, the bureaucratic state has to die. Like they have no other way of feeding off of the rest of us. It's either explicit taxes or inflation, and explicit taxes will get the politicians fired, and inflation is no longer effective because you have an alternative.
Yeah, and what you just said, it makes me think about a shift that's kind of already happening in education here in the workforce, right? When education, I think, the university academia system is a total product of fiat money. I mean, how many universities do we have in the US? It's like, how many people are getting useless degrees, getting all this debt? Like, it's insane. More people are opting out of that, whether it's YouTube University or they're going into trades because they realize, hey, I mean, at 18 and 3 years, I could be making, 6 figures as a electrician or a plumber or things like that. So that to me is encouraging, at least. And I think that's only going to continue to accelerate. So it's almost like we're seeing this kind of earlier than maybe you'd expect. So I don't know if it's obviously a good thing, but it's kind of almost undermining fiat as it continues to get worse.
Yeah, and you could see it, right? Like like I said, if you're providing value, it's a pretty good time because you're gonna get paid. Because there's so many rent seekers. Those are the ones that sort of fall behind as you get more reality, right? Like so again, the DI HR representative at Twitter, right? They get fired. I'm guessing that they can't find other jobs, right? It's going to be very hard for them to find jobs, at least in that area. Maybe you do have to now like go learn a trade or actually provide value. This is the thing about the trades. They provide value, and it's very clear that they provide value, and that's what a normal economy should be. But instead, like zero interest rate environments, like all that money printing, it makes you want to do like the email jobs, right? Like you're sending 5 emails a day, and somehow like you're not really providing value, but you're getting paid. In a zero interest rate environment, those jobs are what everyone seeks because they look and sound easy. You don't have to compete much in the market, and you get chosen not or you don't get paid on results. You get paid on like somebody's agenda, and that's much easier than like satisfying the market. So that's what people tend to do. But we're getting to a point with the higher interest rate environment where the trades and providing value will actually provide more money, and that's where we want to be. And I think that's the natural state of things. And you get more reality back as interest rates rise, and but who knows? Like as the Fed policy swings back in the other direction, well, you're going to get sort of like the pump of the rent-seeking positions again, and then the trades will go down a little bit. So you get this weird balancing, like going back and forth until like the entire system breaks because there's an alternative.
Yeah, and I was about to say it's something that is just the crux of like interventionist monetary policy. Like that's why the bust cycles are good, because all those jobs will get eliminated, and then companies will inherently become more efficient because they can't afford to have these types of jobs and positions anymore because they can't borrow at free money. So I'm curious to see how it plays out in the next 12 to 24 months. I know everybody is. I'd probably bet on the pendulum swinging back in the other direction quite heavily, but who knows? I guess it's all a matter of when and not if at this point. But going back to your book, what was something you uncovered that obviously fiat money penetrates, affects everything? It's literally the title of your book. What was something that was like surprising to you that kind of like, oh, wow, like this is shocking that people probably don't realize this is really the root cause here?
Yeah, I would say like moral standards. So that's not something that a lot of people would point to, but high time preference behavior is really just like a lack of virtue, and it is exacerbated in all kinds of ways. Mostly through debt, right? Like debt is bringing forward consumption, so you can have things now versus saving and getting things later, right? You can have things now and then get enslaved for a few years, and that's the path that so many people take rather than working for it, and it makes you way less price sensitive, right? Because you discount the future so much that what's another extra 3 years of slavery if I can get this nice car now or whatever. And that mentality becomes so corrupting to character, and it really affects everything, because you get less virtue from everybody, and that means everything sort of starts breaking down. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing in society today, where people have such high time preference that they'd rather be homeless, right? And in a sense, those are people that are paying for the excesses earlier, where maybe they spent all their money on drugs or gambling or whatever, and they now have to live on the street because, even now it's the high of getting, fentanyl is better than, the long-term, of not being on fentanyl and being a productive member of society. But the moral standards reduce as you get more high time preference, and all virtue is one. So in a sense, like you have one aspect of character that gets debased, everything else debases along with it. And the moral standards of society have definitely debased. I think people are less true. I was reading, for example, about how like college is done, right? Like, and this guy was saying how you could get paid $18 an hour working at a construction site, like no experience necessary. They'll train you or whatever. $18 an hour, and if you just show up for 6 months, now you're a foreman, and you get paid $35 an hour. Wow. and then like maybe another 12 months after that, you get promoted again, and soon you're making six figures, right? Like 2.5 years or something, and you're making six figures. Why is that paying so much? It's because there's so few people that'll just show up every day. Yeah. That's how bad things have gotten. It's crazy.
Yeah, the work shortage for like manual labor and jobs I just can't understand it. I mean, construction, like any sort of labor, trades, it's insane. And that drives the cost up tremendously. So it's almost another whole feedback loop of inflation right there. And yeah, people just don't want to work. And I don't understand why, because I guess maybe have that mindset, but I guess they're so comfortable in whatever they're doing, making less money or just in the convenience of the fiat world.
Yeah, I mean, there's like sort of like a sanctity of work that's kind of gotten lost because of all the rent-seeking jobs. You know, like we
like the fact of you actually having to work hard.
Yeah,
is that what you're saying?
Well, it's more like rent-seeking jobs and value-producing jobs have been conflated together, right? We just call it a job, whatever it is, and that's a big problem because one, you're actually producing something for society, and the other is more or less satisfying some bureaucrats' preferences and giving permission here or there or something like that. And they have very different effects on the economy, very different effects on your psyche, very different effects on like, you know, how you view the world and so on. But I think most people, when they think of a job, they think more like a rent seeker. Okay, here's something that I get to do, or here's my place where I can sort of collect a check by charging tolls on the highway that you must cross or something like that. And that's what they do, right? This is where they are, like where their mental space is. So, you know, for them, like unemployment's not very different than, say, a rent-seeking job. And like you can kind of view it that way. It's actually probably less destructive than a rent-seeking job, unemployment, like paying it out. So for them, they, you know, it's all the same, right? Like, all right, if I'm not providing value, like, yeah, why not sit at home and play my Xbox or whatever, and not do this boring email job or whatever, instead of, you know, actually providing value to others? Because that's, I think, what get a lot of people that do provide value. Like that's the motivation, not just the money, but it's this knowledge that you're actually benefiting other people in some way. It like sort of like fits you into a community, right? You found your place in like providing value to others instead of sucking value from others, and that's satisfying. There's something good about that, where you kind of want to keep doing that because of you know, the market signals that are actually working, rather than, you know, sort of this rent-seeking stuff. So I think that's the main reason why people really don't want to work.
Yeah, I'm curious if that's going to change when people realize, or maybe enough people get laid off from their rent-seeking jobs. Another area that I think about a lot, and I talked about on a podcast yesterday, is technology and how fiat technology has made, or fiat has made technology addictive by design, and made everyone load dopamine, and that's kind of played into this whole mindset, right? We don't have fulfillment from actually accomplishing things anymore. We're just on our phone, on social media, getting that short-term hits all day, every day, whether that's through Netflix or social media or TikTok or porn or, you know, whatever. It's the degradation of society. Have you thought about that, you know, and how big tech, obviously 5-6 companies, have done this maybe purposefully by design to keep this 7 to 8% hurdle easily overcome with, you know, newer and newer. You got to get the newest phone. You got to get the newest laptop. It's not going to work. The cars, you know, everything. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, I have. And the big turn, I think, is right around 1971, because the technological progress changed its character right around that. So it used to be, okay, we were building rocket ships to the moon or whatever, and trying to figure out, okay, what's like a better transportation method, making things faster, easier, and you know, like trying new technologies that would sort of push the frontier, if you will. Right around 1971, things started turning inward. So television was already pretty big, but it was getting even bigger, right? You had you know, cable TV come in like the early 80s and stuff like that. You had you know, obviously the internet, everything sort of started turning inward. So technology before 71 was more outward facing, right? Like it was trying to conquer new places. Technology after 1971, it became way more inward focused. So you got stuff like, you know, television or whatever, but like, you know, all the way to like the social media doom scrolling that you have now. But think about all of that technology. It's not producing anything. it is navel gazing. It is, okay, like what's so-and-so doing or whatever. It's not actually like the technology that people are pursuing tend to be more like consumer driven, right? It's more about satisfying people's desires to focus inward rather than pushing of the frontier to create new kinds of things and stuff like that. So I point out in the book that I think to a large degree, like technological development stopped right around 1971. And people are like, oh, we have the internet, we have this, and we have that. It's like, yeah, but like they're all inward facing, right? Like they're not going outward. Like we had shorter flight times from New York to London back in the 60s than we do now. Like we're going backwards. We're like actively going backwards. We had the Concorde for a while. That was way faster, but that stopped running in 2004. We have interesting tech that we could be developing, right? So 1950s and 60s, we developed the nuclear submarine. This is, and a lot of people think a nuclear submarine is one that can launch nuclear weapons or something. No, it's just fueled by nuclear power. And and if you think about a submarine, it has to go way underneath, and it needs to be around the bottom of the sea for a while, right? Like a significant amount of time. Like if you're, like in enemy territory or whatever, you want to be, you don't have to get up and refuel every 3 days or something like that. And this is what a nuclear power submarine like lets you do: is you power it once, and your fuel is good for 18 months. You can stay under the sea for 18 months, and we had this technology in the 50s and still use it today, right? And it's not just nuclear submarines at this point. I think you have nuclear aircraft carriers, nuclear ice pickers, and places where they're like refueling is just impractical. This is the tech that they use, especially with water. But think about like how energy dense nuclear must be to be able to power an entire submarine for 18 months. That is some insane power density. Where has that technology gone? Well, they use the same exact design, right? Because nuclear submarines, you use seawater to heat up the seawater, and that heats up, more water, and that which turns a turbine. That exact same design is what they use for nuclear power plants, right? And that's the only one that's been more or less allowed to exist. So they haven't really developed nuclear power much since then. The nuclear power plants that are in existence, especially like in France and all those places, it's the same exact design as a nuclear submarine. How come we haven't tried other stuff, right? Because like, how cool would it be if your car didn't need to fuel, right? Like, and I talked with an engineer one time about that, and they're like, yeah, if you had nuclear fuel, you wouldn't need to, refuel your car for like 10 years. I mean, this is order of magnitude difference, right? Like most people refuel their car once a week. This is crazy, right? Like this is like crazy innovation that we could have had, but just absolutely stopped starting around 1971.
It's so sad to me. Like, it's even in the science world where I geek out, like there was so many cool researchers like in the 40s, 50s, 60s, early 70s. And then I was like, the door was shut, you know? And that's also contributed, I think, from the technology side of things to like human health issues, because they just didn't care whether, things are bad for our health, our phones, our, the way we do everything on a daily basis, when there's simple engineering solutions that could have been made in the beginning, but instead they chose the route of consumerism and addictive technology, which I guess you encompass that very well as being very inward facing. So one of the things I'm most excited about to getting back to a more of a, Bitcoin standard or a value-based standard is because people always, I think they conflate that. They're like, wow, well, this technology we have is great. We're talking on the internet, Bitcoin is a result of this. And I'm like, yeah, but like, imagine what we could have had. I mean, we were supposed to be like, all the 2000s, 21st century, we were supposed to be doing way more cool shit at this point.
We were supposed to have moon bases, and we were supposed to have a trip to Mars and stuff like that. None of that has happened because no one really was allowed to push the frontier. And this is one of the one of the things that fiat money does is it keeps everything static because the incumbents want to stay in their position. The reason we don't have nuclear power is because there's corrupt sort of like bargain made between like fossil fuel companies and the green lobby to basically kick out nuclear in every way, shape, or form. So like they knew it was a threat, but they wanted to keep their position, right? Standard Oil, like, and all of its derivative companies, they wanted their position. They're some of the biggest companies in the world to this day. They wanted to keep their position, and the way you do that in a fiat economy is get subsidized and like regulate away competition and stuff. I mean, they're really like air travel has not changed in like 60 years, like not significantly. Yeah, now maybe you have a screen in front of you or something, and
you get blasted by Wi-Fi the whole entire time.
And maybe the overhead compartment is like a little more efficient with standardized luggage, and you could put it up on its side or something. But really, the fundamental design of an airplane has not changed in 60 years. What's going on? Well, I mean, you could have new designs, but there's so much regulation around, like what you're allowed to do with commercial aircraft that really there's only two companies left that produce commercial aircraft. It's Boeing and Airbus. That's it. Like, I read about like drone technology, for example. That's like one way in which, they've advanced maybe like the last 10 years. And it turns out like a lot of that tech comes from cell phones. And it's like, oh, we could use a cell phone technology for drones or whatever. But they've come up with ways to use drone technology for, transporting people, right? Because you could transport packages just fine. You just put like
a bigger pod on that.
Yeah, and you could totally do it, but not allowed. FAA, right? Like this would cut into Boeing and Airbus, and Delta and United and American Airlines profits, so we can't have that. So like this technology isn't allowed to develop, where you might have very different ways of transport, right? Imagine like.
Well, I'm just thinking about the traffic I've been sitting in here in Austin because I'm living in Wyoming and I can't deal with traffic. I'm like, there's no way this should be a real thing. Like in 2023. Are you kidding?
Like think about all the.
There's nothing we can do.
Like and like car companies have more or less like regulated like these weird like city designs into existence because they keep their position because there's no other sort of method of transportation that's available, and you could have entire cities that are working off of drone technology that lets you go from place to place, and like entire you get all of this like footprint back from the roads that you can reclaim, and like you can make them human sized, and like you could make entire cities completely walkable. Maybe like I don't know, use scooter technology. Like there could be so many other things, but because the incumbents control so much, and because they're so large and employ so many people and have so many lobbyists and stuff like that, you don't get any of this, and you stay static. Like cars haven't changed much design either, right? Like I was seeing like a picture of like cars from like 30 different manufacturers. They all look the same. Yeah, it's like basically been standardized, and this, like, we're not getting innovation. We're not getting technology. We're not pushing the frontier in any way because the incumbents get to keep what they have. And that means that we can't have nice things because the the rent seekers must keep their position.
Yeah. And say what you want about Elon Musk. I mean, I don't love the guy, but he's been challenging this mainstream view, this dogma. So it's a good thing in that regard, right? Like at least throwing some crazy ideas out there. Like, innovation, like it just doesn't. If he's so radical for just trying to change a car going to space, but the tunneling for the traffic, there should be 10 guys like that. There should be 20. There should be so many people like that, but there's so many hurdles because of the fiat system that only a billionaire, the richest guy in the world, but he is the richest guy in the world as a result of disrupting, but it's so challenging. And that's
and think about the people that would have gone into that are now in investment banking, right? That's or like doing a scammy Web3 startup or something like that. That's what they would rather do because it's easier. Your income is more sure, and you don't have to take as much risk.
Comfortable.
Yeah. But this is another thing about fiat money, is that it takes all the entrepreneurs out of the equation and turns them into rent seekers. Like, I mean, talk about like the worst trade-off imaginable. Your most productive people that would be inventing stuff, like creating companies, adding a tremendous amount of value, they're instead sucking the equivalent amount of value. It's turning a giant positive into a giant negative. This is why civilization continues to crumble.
It's so insane. Is there something you're specifically excited about from, like, say, a more value-based Bitcoin standard, architecture, or just technology, like something personally that you'd be most excited about, something in your daily life that really drives you insane? Or
I mean, I honestly, like, the more I learn about nuclear and the potential of nuclear, it's just like, okay, we could have cars that could not need fueling. You could design them completely differently, right? Like, or you could have airplanes that could fly for a week, right? Like, wait, what? Right? Like,
probably a lot faster too.
Yeah, and probably get them faster. I mean, you need some sort of like nuclear jet engine or something like that, which needs development and stuff. But entirely possible, right? The power output of nuclear is just so dense. Could design them very differently. You don't have to carry all of this very heavy fuel, and it get very inefficient. You can, have very different, like, all kinds of things, and you could try different things. You can have, three-dimensional sort of like traffic instead of like two-dimensional ones that we have on roads. But like we should be living in the future, but no, we're still living in the 70s, right? Like that, it really hasn't, like, the physical world is not really that much different than the 70s. Like, the technology just kind of is stuck there, and we haven't progressed. And all this hope that we had for the future, it's all kind of gone to naught because things kind of stay the same under a fiat economy.
Yeah, I'm glad to see this resurgence in nuclear somewhat, or at least, like, it was literally dead. I mean, there was like no new plants, no new anything. So I'm excited to see that. Yeah, it is so sad. It is sad because, like, especially as, like, I grew up mostly in the 2000s, born in 96. It's like, damn, I should have all this cool stuff. We should be way further ahead.
Even your laptop is charging right now, right? And your phone has a battery.
Shit. You have to. It's
yeah. I mean, instead of battery type, if you had like a little bit of nuclear fuel in there, right?
Nuclear for everything.
I mean, you could run your laptop 24/7 for 2 years probably, and like nothing. Like, it's always on. Like, you wouldn't need like the electric company, like, fueling your house. You have your own personal nuclear thingy, and then like you have power to your entire house, no blackouts, nothing.
I mean, think of the grid,
right?
Like,
no electrical wires, right? Like, you could dig a well. You could have a ranch in Wyoming that doesn't have connection to anything. You have internet through the satellite. You have a well on your property. You have energy through that. Like, it could be so different, but instead we're stuck with the technology from the 70s. We haven't progressed at all because the incumbents keep everything the same.
That's such a good point. Jimmy, what is next for you? Last question here. Fiat Ruins Everything. Obviously, you're going to promote that. It's definitely worth reading, everybody. I'm going to recommend it. I think it's just so pervasive. And my job is also to convince a lot of the health-focused people to get into Bitcoin. I think this is a perfect book for them. And I'm going to write a bit about some of the topics we discussed here. But yeah, what is next on your journey, your mission?
I think I need to go back to my technical roots. So, I will be doing a Taproot Music Frost seminar on January 8th at Bitcoin Commons. I have a programming blockchain seminar. That's the class that's based on, or the book Programming Bitcoin is based on that seminar. I'll be running that in Dubai in February. But yeah, the plan is to do more of these seminars, more of the technical work. I think there's a lot of really cool stuff that hasn't been embraced by the Bitcoin companies in this space, and this is my way of sort of nudging them towards the better security systems that we can get as a result of these upgrades that we've had the past few years.
I love it. That's definitely needed. where can, obviously they could buy your book on Amazon, but is it on the Safe House as well? Or
it's on my website,
your website.
Fiat Ruins Everything, and you can order directly. I'm using ZapRite as the as the payment processor, by the way. Wonderful service. Yep. And you can also buy it at bitcoinmagazine.com, and they have a store there, so you can just buy it directly there. But yeah, if you want a signed copy, go to fiatruinseverything.com.
Amazing. Yeah, don't buy it on Amazon if you can buy it with Bitcoin. Come on, use it. And then social media.
Yeah, Jimmy Song on X, jimmysong.substack.com for my newsletter. My website is programmingbitcoin.com.
And you have a podcast of your own as well, right?
Yeah, Fiat Ruins Everything. I mean, Bitcoin fixes everything,
There we go.
fixes this, and Fiat Ruins Everything is sort of like a play on that. But yeah, that's a podcast that I do. Try to release about once a week, but some weeks I skip it. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining me here. It's a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in, folks. We'll see you next time.